Alright. Don't touch that dial, because the signal dusted off those speakers might be the difference between life and death. Cutting through the static this half hour is a scarifying slice of terracotta. Are You Afraid of the Dark spins round and round with Friday the 13th, the series, and it's riding the scare waves right on down to you, so put up your spooks.
This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horror, share original scary stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and I'm repping the 80s.
I'm Ryan Gerasi. I'm repping them 90s.
This week's theme?
Dead Air. My episode is Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of Station 109.1. And I didn't remember this, but it's the second Stig story, so you finally get some closure on that hanging thread.
As I was looking through all the episodes of this season, when I went to look it up, I saw that this was the season with the Dead Man's Float. And I was like, oh man, Tale of the Fire Ghost. There's a lot of great Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes in this season. So Stig coming back for round 2 for redemption.
So, wouldn't you know it, there's a kid, Chris, who's obsessed with death, but not like vampire kid whose name I can't remember. Adder.
Yeah, I immediately thought of Adder, our sad goth twink
Sadder
from the
Adder.
previous episode. But young Chris is a turbo goth. His parents need to have a very frank and open discussion with him about his infatuation with death. And maybe it's healthy. Maybe it's healthy for that age. But if left unchecked, I think...
Well, he's torturing insects. And
Yeah,
so he's not on
good.
a good path. And his parents are freaked out. They're all at dinner, and his mom goes, "Pass the gravy." And so they don't know what to do. So he's keeping a cricket in a jar.
I wonder how long he can survive in there.
And soon, humans. His big brother, Ryan Gosling, thinks he might have gone crazy after playing hide-and-seek in the cemetery all night long with his friends. We don't know what happened in the cemetery, but something.
Do you think Stig was laying a little extra slack there so he could go back and tell a prequel story? Or Stig is just banging out stories every week and we don't always get to hear him?
Yeah, he's a machine. But I like to think... I don't know who told the story of Old Man Corcoran, but I like to think that's a subtle nod in that direction. It's another really good episode that...
There is a connection between Old Man Corcoran and Hungry Hounds and
this
Tale of
episode.
Station 109.1. It could be a new Vink.
Reusing... That's actually a good point, yeah. This old ghoul man who appears in so many episodes. Usually in rumpled overalls, but not this time. Ryan Gosling tricks Chris. He's some sort of mechanic kid, and he hangs out with some mechanic adult.
He's a gearhead kid.
Oddly, the greaser adult mechanic is oh, your poor little brother. That poor kid. Someone's got to help him.
We've talked about monster kids, and we've even talked about adventure safari kids. This is not even our first Motorhead kid we've had on the show, because the tale of the truck crashed Ghost Diner.
Yeah.
When those kids went to the junkyard and wanted to fix up their car, and those were 2 little gearhead kids.
Right. So Gosling tricks Chris into getting into the hearse that they're working on. He locks him in there, and I don't know if hearses, like police cars, only lock from the outside, but...
I mean, Chris was willing and able. He was licking the inside of the hearse. That kid, seriously...
He was psyched. That's how he got in there.
He was like, oh my God, there were so many corpses transported in this vehicle, and one was just in here. I can almost feel the necrotic energy.
I can still smell the rot.
Do you think he's a necrophiliac?
He doesn't keep dead things around.
Well,
that
he's
we know
gonna.
of.
Yeah. I think he might be a budding necrophiliac.
Yeah. So Gosling hooks up the car battery, and the car goes wild. The horn goes off. The radio pops on, and it does freak Chris out. So he goes and turns off the ignition, but the radio is still playing, and it tunes itself to station 109.1.
This is 109.1, radio for the dimensionally challenged.
As this torture is going on, Gosling sees some old guy just standing in the street who asks if he can tell him the way home, but Gosling doesn't know. And then we see the old guy vanish, which kind of gives the game away, but I thought you need spooks in your spooky episode, so like they had to do something. Although it's hot on the heels of the radio tuning itself, so they could have saved the surprise for a little bit longer.
I think once the radio tuned itself to 109.1 and the eerie recording came through, we're just off to the races at that point.
Yeah. So Chris is obsessed with station 109.1. He keeps listening to it on the radio. He goes to an early version of the web and searches for the station, but it doesn't exist. But there's a last known address for that station. So he heads in that direction.
Talk about dead air.
Yeah. Somewhere nearby, a bunch of weirdos are just like stumbling through the streets in old-timey clothing, asking for the way home. He doesn't know the way home, and he's freaked out by them. He finds the building, and it's clearly marked station 109.1, and he goes inside. There's a bunch of people waiting in there, Beetlejuice style, for their numbers to be called. He like goes up to the window, knocks on it, and then Gilbert Gottfried is the DJ, and he screams at the kid not to knock on the window and to go wait in line. He's pissed that he cut in line, but then he's like, the hell with it, just come back anyway. And then so he brings him into the back room. He thinks Chris is this guy Daniel Carpenter that was in a hearse, and apparently the only guy who died in a hearse in recent times. He slaps a snap bracelet on Chris's wrist. Bingo bango, hella 90s. And then he...
locking it in early.
And then he says...
You're going home to the next line.
Some crazy guy bursts through the doors and is like, not me, you got the wrong guy. And he is dragged through death's door by a couple of Grim Reapers. And Gottfried is like, he led a terrible life. He's gonna lead an even worse death. I forget what he says. Something like that. And then Chris runs away in terror. He goes to his bedroom where I spotted a ghastly grinner cardboard cutout.
Oh, nice.
Ryan Gosling comes into the bedroom, which I suppose they share, and ignores Chris as though he can't see him. I think he's on the phone. He's talking about his favorite radio program, Clark and Ryan. Chris tries to smack Ryan Gosling, but his hand passes right through him, and he realizes he is incorporeal. So he runs through a door and ends up right back in the radio station because... you know, with ghosts and ghouls, there are no rules. He realizes that the snap bracelet has something to do with it, so he goes, lose this, which if you watch enough episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark, you will hear more than once. But he can't get it off.
It snapped.
So he runs into the back room where Gottfried is doing a little announcer voice.
We're on the air live, so to speak. This is station 109.1 at the end of your radio dial. For spirits at the end of their ropes.
I made that up.
Chris figures out that he can get in touch with his brother by hijacking the airwaves and tuning it to the Clark and Ryan frequency. So he does this, he gets a message to Gosling, and Gosling just thinks it's a big joke, but then the ghost from the beginning that vanished, who's actually Daniel Carpenter, appears. He's like, I'm the ghost. Your brother is not the ghost. And then Gosling's like, whatever, dude. And then he turns around, and then the ghost is in front of him. And then he turns around, and the ghost is behind him. And then he goes into his house, and the ghost is in the kitchen. And he's like, whoa! So he runs to his bedroom, sees the address of the radio station on the early version of the web. And then Daniel Carpenter ghost appears in his bedroom and begs for help. Back at the radio station, Chris is getting chased around by like Reapers and Gottfrieds. It's madness. Gosling and Daniel Carpenter show up, and they're like, that's not Daniel Carpenter, this is Daniel Carpenter. And Gottfried's like, really? Nah, whatever. He chucks Chris through the death's door into the afterlife. Whole place shakes like it's in an earthquake. Gottfried says, that never happened before. And then Chris gets like fired out of the door, and he's like, they said I wasn't dead, and they said they need to have a word with you. And Gottfried's like, oh, whoa, I don't know. He's like, oh boy, that sucks. But it's no big deal. Take the bracelet off your wrist, you put it on his wrist. And so he snap bracelets off the snap bracelets on the snap bracelet, onto the ghost. Daniel Carpenter goes into a beautiful, heavenly, glowing stairway through death's door because he led a good life.
It's only horrible if you've led a bad life. If you led a good life, it's the best thing going.
Chris goes back home and becomes a normal, baseball-loving kid who wears pastel-colored clothing and sets crickets free. The end.
So this was one of your favorite episodes?
It's notable for having Gilbert Gottfried and Ryan Gosling in, like, an early terrible role. It was, like, a lot spookier, I think, back then for me, because there was, like, Reapers and the idea of being thrown into the afterlife before your time. But yeah, some not so great performances. Kind of a dull episode, I guess. Not one of the greatest. But I thought it was kind of a good idea. Certainly Stig's first story was much, much better.
Stig had a hard time following up with his second performance. And then they let him in. It's kind of like when they give a pity Oscar to someone, like a Lifetime Achievement Oscar, when they should have gotten it for their first movie. I will say this episode looked cheap and terrible. It is the kind of production value that you'd normally knock my shows for, like Tales from the Dark Side.
It's interesting that you say that, because I thought that the radio station itself was pretty nice. It was all like old wood paneling and old-fashioned sort of equipment.
The way it was shot and the way it was lit,
it was very flat.
And like the people in the Grim Reaper costumes, it was definitely just guys in robes.
Yeah.
Everything about it looked kind of chintzy and flat and bad. Normally, Are You Afraid of the Dark looks pretty good, looks pretty slick, you know, even if the effects aren't great.
Yeah.
And their practical effects are usually on point.
I wonder how much of the budget of this episode went to pay Gilbert Gottfried, who was like at the height of his powers at that time.
I looked up Gilbert Gottfried. I was like, he's not from Canada, is he? Nope, he's from New York.
I wonder, his kids must have been fans. Wait, I don't even know if he had kids. Maybe he just was bored.
2 questions. A, do you think that when Gosling hooked the hearse up to the car battery, he somehow electrocuted his little brother and killed him?
No, because heaven literally spits him out for not being dead yet. Although I suppose it could have been like a near-death situation to get him to start seeing ghosts and stuff. But then Gosling also sees ghosts, so...
It's true.
They're just wandering around and nobody has noticed all these randos in the street, in the middle of the street, looking for the way home.
I think something about working on the hearse put them on the frequency of 109.1.
Yeah.
The ghost frequency. Another way he might have died is from the slap bracelet, because apparently they were banned at some point because people were selling knockoff slap bracelets with like really thin steel inside, and it was slicing open kids' wrists.
Oh,
That could have brought him to death's door also. Yeah. Final question. When he was sent to the other side alive and then spat out, do you think he's now immortal? Do you think he's undead, half dead? What do you think's going on there?
No, he's just regular old baseball-loving, pastel-wearing kid.
Do you think that part of him died when he crossed over? And he was like, yay, I love baseball and crickets now.
I don't know. I mean, maybe he... Aside from that, I do love how every time one of these kids has like a change of heart, they just change their clothes and put on like quote-unquote normal kid clothes.
And get into sports.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed that I don't know if I'd ever noticed before about the end of Beetlejuice, when Lydia, after her experience, she puts on like her normal school uniform, and like her hair's not weird anymore, and she like isn't as gothy anymore. But if you look closely, when she leaves school, she does have like a black skirt underneath her school uniform. So it's not like it usually is in these situations where it's like you were wrong before to wear those clothes and be that way, and now you see the light, and so you're wearing normal kid clothes. It's like, yeah, you know, she doesn't need to be as performative, but like it still is a part of her. Kind of nice.
Whereas you would think that the target audience for Are You Afraid of the Dark would be
goth
spooky kids,
yeah,
goth kids, and the happy ending should not be that the kid starts playing baseball and dressing like a normie, unless it's really just broadcast out to a wider Canadian audience and they just want kids of all stripes, not just goth kids.
So the next time you play your radio, listen close. You might just pick up a signal just for you.
Well, my story, Friday the 13th, the series, Season 2, and now for the news. It is a dark and stormy night. Inside a secure facility, a man is menacing Mary, a hysterical young woman, with a snake. It is the tiniest snake imaginable, like a grass snake. Like, I've seen soda straws that were bigger than this snake, but she is FFOing her way through a traumatic episode. She reveals that her father put snakes in her bed, That's why she killed him.
Jesus.
Catharsis achieved. She weeps. Dr. Finch embraces her and tells her she'll never hurt anyone again. Elsewhere, another homicidal patient is raving mad. The orderly wants to sedate him, but Dr. Avril Carter says no meds. He's about to have a therapy session. And across the hall, a charming patient, John Gibson, the rapist and serial killer, watches from his own locked cell with interest. Dr. Carter opens her office safe and pulls out an antique radio. It's already buzzing with old-timey music, despite the fact that its cord is broken. Mary, now cured because she's conquered her phobia of snakes, is brought back to her room, where the antique radio is waiting. The radio turns on and makes an announcement.
And now the news. Thousands of snakes are loose this hour inside the Mascio Institute for the Criminally Insane. They began appearing an hour ago and are now reported to have overrun A ward. The ward is reported to be in chaos, with staff unable to prevent attacks on the helpless patients. All doctors, nurses, and orderlies are being evacuated from the building. The institute is literally boiling with snakes.
So Mary dies from fear after her hallucination of hundreds of snakes in her room, and this terrifying news report is followed up with a happier story.
In a moment, we'll report on an incredible medical breakthrough by Dr. Avril Carter. This brilliant psychiatrist will tonight be rewarded for her research by discovering a cure for serial killer Craig Eddy, a paranoid psychotic who hears voices which urge him to acts of violence. But until then, we'll return to our music.
The way F-13 works, it's 1 in, 1 out. So you kill one person, you get one boon. Dr. Avril meets with the raving serial killer. She explains that his alternate personality is gone and that he's the only one to blame. He weeps. She pronounces him cured. The next day at Curious Goods, purveyor of fine cursed antiques, ravishing redhead Mickey and man of action Ryan get a response from a flyer they've sent out, asking for reports of cursed antiques. They head over to the clinic for the criminally insane, where a nurse info dumps that Dr. Finch's patients are dropping like flies because they're all being scared to death. They ask Dr. Finch if he knows anything about a weird radio. He politely ushers them out. I thought the twist was going to be at this point that he was going to have them committed to the institution because they were rambling about evil radios, but no, they just walk out. Dr. Finch meets with Dr. Carter and says that he doesn't approve of her methods. There's no way that these dangerous patients are safe to release. And she says, at least all my patients aren't dying of fear, so suck it. That night, Ryan tries to break in by climbing over the fence. It's really dicey, and he barely clears the barbed wire, and then boom, the electric fence fries him, and he dangles upside down unconscious from the barbed wire.
I thought he was done for.
He got fucked up. I was not expecting that. That was so crazy. Because, like, the sparks start in his groin. Like, he gets totally electrocuted.
Oh, yeah.
And then collapse. He's rushed inside the clinic, suffering from a full-body seizure. I assume this is the moment where they're going to toss him inside a cell. But no, Dr. Carter just gives him a quick exam, asks him a few questions. And because Dr. Finch and Dr. Carter are never in the same place, Ryan pretends he hasn't been there before and it was all just a fraternity prank. So she sends him on his way. Mickey and Ryan do some research and confirm that Dr. Finch, the fearologist, is the one whose patients are dying of fear. Classic cursed object case. They decide to ask the friendly Dr. Carter for information. And of course, they can use yet another cover story. This time, Mickey's going to pretend to be a reporter. Dr. Finch is doing his thing with a lit match, freaking out a patient with fire phobia.
His whole thing is just holding the thing they're scared of, like poking it in their faces and being like, hey, oh.
Dr. Carter demands access to the rapist and serial killer, John Gibson. But Dr. Finch says, hell no. It's not safe for anyone to have contact with that freak. Not even you. But Dr. Carter decides to play hardball. Carter puts the antique radio in Fire Guy's room with predictable results.
And now the news. This bulletin just in. The Mascio Institute for the Criminally Insane is engulfed in flames. The fire, which started in the basement, is now racing through the aging structure, totally out of control.
Oh no! Help me!
Fire Guy yeets himself out the window to his death. This cuts Mickey's interview short. Dr. Finch sees the radio in Fire Guy's room and notices later when it's gone. The nurse even saw Dr. Carter take it. He's starting to suspect that something is amiss. He confronts her. She lays him out with a lamp. One tap. unconscious. She straps him to a gurney and shoves him into the cell of a berserker maniac. In the fracas, a business card falls out of his pocket, and Dr. Carter sees that Mickey the reporter is actually working at Curious Goods, purveyor of fine cursed antiques. So she has John Gibson, rapist and murderer, pretend to be Finch and call Mickey back to collect the antique radio. Mickey goes alone, unarmed, to the abandoned wing of the asylum. She clearly has not learned anything from 2 seasons of taking cursed objects from desperate killers. Ryan, however, has learned from his mistakes. He straps on some rubber gloves and climbs the fence. Mickey is brutally assaulted by John Gibson, rapist and murderer, but one tap of the flashlight lays him out cold. She runs away. Yeah,
and then she sobs in a sewer puddle. It's interesting that she does go away and like break down for any length of time in an episode of television where they have finite runtime. But you know, it's good. That's what the character would do.
It's what the character would do. It's what the character does. But it really elevates the trauma that Mickey is going through. Like it's brutal. Like it's a really bad, violent assault. It seems awful, and then she gets away by knocking him out. Like, it's not played for thrills. It's really horrifying.
It's kind of weird, actually, but
yeah, it's really strange. Ryan rushes in to find her, but one tap, Dr. Carter lays him out cold. They strap him to a gurney and prepare to kill him with electroshock therapy, while the antique radio eggs them on. Yeah, see? Kill them all by 10:55 p.m. and you'll win the Nobel Prize. Meh. Mickey sneaks in and shoves the electroshock paddles into John Gibson, rapist and murderer. He dies, but the radio is not pleased. Because Dr. Carter hasn't met the deadline, she's old news. The radio zaps her and she explodes. Mickey and Ryan bring the antique radio back to Curious Goods, where they store it in the vault. She bemoans how hard and dangerous their job is. And then the antique radio turns on. It's like, meh, see, this just in. Safe way of recovering cursed antiques has been discovered. She FFOs. The end.
Was the radio man Ernest Borgnine? It sure sounded like it.
He had a great voice. I looked him up thinking it would be some famous actor, but nope.
Really?
Just a guy with a great voice for radio.
Man, I could have sworn.
So normally these cursed objects are mindless and voiceless. Like it's a coin you flip and someone dies, and then you flip the coin again and it'll bring someone to life. Or that episode we watched with the music box, watery hands might pull someone in and drown them, but there's no character or like personality behind it. What I liked about this episode was that the radio announcer was painting a picture to really scare the people to death and explaining like in depth how the snakes and the fire would take over the clinic. It was laying out the psychological case to get insights for the doctor to cure the patients and stuff like that. And you really got a sense that there is an infernal bureaucracy behind these cursed objects. There's like an office somewhere of demons who are like doing research and
running radio stations.
I really like that part. When they end the episode, they always put the cursed object inside their like mystically sealed bank vault. This was the first time I noticed that there were symbols on the outside of the vault, and they looked like Hebrew. So I took some screen captures. I found like an online Hebrew alphabet. I tried to match them up, put it into a translator, and what it came up with was your arrow. And so I emailed friend of the show, Mark Walken, and asked him if he still had enough Hebrew learning. He kind of noodled on it. He checked with his father, and his father was like, yeah, it's a sort of a weird old way to write it, but it says your arrow. So I wonder if that's not part of some like biblical curse, some Solomonic seal. We should ask Ed. So this is a bit of a trope, but the idea of someone who's in an institute for the criminally insane, who's just had a lifetime of mental illness, and then someone says the right thing and like snaps them out of it, and that's it, they're cured, and these people are getting out of the asylum and going to like minimum security prisons after that.
That's how it works.
Yeah, I'd say funny, but more just odd.
That's how I cure myself of all my mental illness. I just watch YouTube videos that until one says the right thing.
Yep.
And then I'm cured.
There'll be no more nightmares. Not tonight, or ever again.
Body count for, and now the news, 5. for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
You know, I don't think any of them count because they're all ghosts already.
Scare factor for Friday the 13th. You had the snakes, and then you had the flames, both of which are kind of scary. Definitely if you're,
I would say that the
phobic of those things.
The criminal was genuinely scary.
Yeah, that was the part where it went from like, oh, we're watching a show about cursed antiques to like, oh God, this is a serial killer brutalizing a woman. This is very upsetting. So scare factor high. Scare factor for the Tale of Station 109.1.
Daniel Carpenter like appearing and disappearing could have been a little chilling.
Daylight spooks.
Daylight
Sorry.
spooks, yeah. No.
It was all daylight spooks. Gross factor, there was that berserker who tore apart Dr. Finch. Did you recognize that guy at all?
No.
The actor who believably played like a Cro-Magnon berserker, he was not only in the first X-Men movie, in a blink and you miss it cameo where Wolverine is in that cage match brawl, but he was also the voice of Hank McCoy, Beast, the X-Men in the original X-Men cartoon.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Huh. So take that, Gilbert Gottfried and Ryan Gosling.
Yeah,
I got the real star power.
Seriously. And such an erudite individual.
Gross factor for Are You Afraid of the Dark? Stig.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It wasn't that gross, really, but burying the shrimp kind of grossed me out for some weird reason.
Yeah, anything with food.
Yeah.
Or just shrimp in general. Like,
they're pretty gross.
You can eat shrimp if you want.
Sea bugs.
There's sea bugs, but the fact is no one wants to see a loving close-up of a shrimp on camera. What the factor? Pretty high for Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
What the factor for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I think it was pretty low.
Here's what I'm seeing. Not a lot of speed bumps on the road to victory for Friday the 13th until we come to Vink Factor. Because yes, my episode has a killer psychiatrist. She's a little vinky, but the Tale of Station 109.1 has a Ghostmaster General / DJ who has multiple jobs that combines technology and the supernatural. Vink Factor high. And he's gross because he's Gilbert Gottfried.
Oh, poor old Gilbert.
Theme of dead air.
I think it was pretty equal for both. In yours, the air caused people to be dead, and in mine, the air was created by the dead. Although I can't really say whether or not yours was created by the dead. It was created by something.
I'll toss that one to Are You Afraid of the Dark? Because it was a dead radio station sending out signals to
channel.
Dead people. Totally 80s. I got nothing. Hella 90s.
Slap bracelets.
Rip flannel.
Does not get more 90s than that.
So it all comes down to that gross factor. I think that's the tiebreaker. And what did we decide? I don't know. Roll back the tape. Gross factor.
Electrocuted
edging
bodies.
it out on
groins,
gross factor.
Sparking groins. And
Sparking groins. That was shock factor.
Oh.
Taking it on, shock factor is Friday the 13th, the series, and now the news.
Shock jock.
What a great show. Yeah. Literally shocked as jock.
Rerun for your life.
And stay tuned for our next episode of We Bleed Orange and Black right after this message.